Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Office on Violence Against Women Fiscal Year 2023 Transitional Housing Grant Assistance Program for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking solicitation pre-application information session. On behalf of the Office on Violence Against Women, the Transitional Housing Unit welcomes you to this call. The Transitional Housing Unit consists of our supervisor, Michelle Brickley, who unfortunately is unable to join us for this session today. On the call, we have Mirta Charles, Charlana Brady, Christina Baccaro, Zelda Tacky, and myself, Sharon Elliott. Dana Marshall is also a member of the Transitional Housing Unit, but she is currently deployed. So with that, I will turn it over to Mirta Charles to provide an overview of the OVW Transitional Housing Program.
Thank you, Sharon. This is Mirta Charles. I'm happy to join you today to talk about the Transitional Housing Assistance Grants for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, or sexual assault program. OVW's Transitional Housing Program funds organizations to assist victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, VAWA crimes, who are homeless or in need of transitional housing as a result of a situation of the VAWA crimes. Provides funding for survivors in need of transitional housing, short-term housing assistance, and related supportive services for 6 to 24 months. Eligible applicants are states, units of local government, Indian tribes, and other organizations with a documented history of effective work concerning sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. What's new about the program? The Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2022, VAWA 2022, revised the definition of victim services or services to include legal assistance, thereby broadening the scope of all VAWA grant programs that support victim services to include comprehensive legal assistance by an attorney. More information can be found on page 9 under limited use of funds. Projects proposing to do legal assistance must submit a delivery of legal assistance certification. This can be found on page 15 of the FY23 Transitional Housing Solicitation. Please note, sample certification letters can be found on the OVW website. Applicants proposing to use Transitional Housing Program grant funds for support services only may now submit budgets for up to $400,000 for 36-month period. Purpose area versus priority areas. Purpose areas are those indicated as part of the OVW Transitional Housing Program. OVW priority areas are those receiving office-wide priority for this year's solicitation. Purpose areas. Funds under this program must be used for one or more of the following purposes. Transitional housing, including funding for operating expenses of newly developed or existing transitional housing, and or short-term housing assistance, including rental or utility payments, assistance, and assistance with related expenses such as payment of security deposits and other costs incidental to relocation of transitional housing, and provide comprehensive voluntary support services designed for survivors fleeing a situation of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and or stalking, and helps victims transition into permanent, affordable housing. Purpose areas continued. For the purposes of Office on Violence Against Women, transitional housing is housing with a voluntary services that are designed for survivors offered for at least 6 months and no more than 24 months. Transitional housing can be provided in facilities that are owned by the applicant and units that are leased by the applicant, or by providing rental assistance for units leased directly to victims. Support services offered should help transitional housing participants locate and secure permanent housing, secure employment, and integrate into a community. Examples of support services include employment, counseling, occupational training, transportation, counseling, childcare services, safety planning, case management, and other assistance. Support services must be offered to all transitional housing participants on a voluntary basis. OVW funded transitional housing projects cannot mandate that recipients participate in support services as a condition of receiving housing. Please note, there are only purposes for this grant may be used for. Transitional housing and support services. Grant recipients must provide both transitional housing, those were purpose areas 1 or 2, and support services, purpose area 3. OVW funds can be used to provide transitional housing, support services, or both. If OVW funds are only used to provide either transitional housing or support services, then the other must be provided by a project partner and/or another funding source. The applicant must include this information in the data requested with the application, making sure what funding source is supporting the housing and support services. OVW priority areas. 1. Advance racial equity as an essential component of ending sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. 2. Expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, including as a tool for violence prevention. 3. Projects primarily serving underserved populations. Let's go to OVW priority number 1. Advance racial equity as an essential component of ending the VAWA crimes. To qualify for this priority, the applicant must be a culturally specific organization, demonstrate a documented history of effective work concerning VAWA crimes, provide a detailed plan for assisting survivors from culturally specific communities in need of transitional housing services, and submit budgets for up to $550,000 for a 36-month period. Culturally specific means primarily directed towards racial and ethnic minority groups such as American Indian, including Alaskan Natives, Eskimos, Alouette, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders, Blacks, and Hispanics. OVW priority area 2. Expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of VAWA crimes as a tool for violence prevention. To qualify for this priority, applicants must propose projects that demonstrate strong partnerships with workforce development, job training programs, provide a detailed plan for assisting survivors toward graduated economic empowerment and survivor autonomy while using a voluntary services model, and submit budgets for up to $550,000 for a 36-month period. OVW priority number 3. Projects primarily serving underserved populations. To qualify for this statutory priority area, an applicant must propose projects that primarily serve individuals from underserved populations who are victims of VAWA crimes, provide a detailed plan identifying the underserved populations being addressed. Describe how the project will provide specific services to victims from the identified underserved populations within the proposed project service area. Describe gaps in current services and barriers for victims seeking services. Demonstrate strong partnerships with organizations with expertise and history of services to each underserved community. Submit budgets for up to $550,000 for a 36-month period. I'm going to hand this off to my colleague, Charlena, to review the prohibited activities and limits to funding.
Thank you. I will be reviewing with you the activities that compromise victim safety, out-of-scope activities, unallowable activities, and the limited use of funds. Activities that compromise victim safety. OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. Applicants that propose any such activities may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration. Information on activities that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability may be found in the solicitation companion guide. Out of scope activities. The following activities are out of scope: research projects, prevention activities, family violence, housing retention, emergency shelter or short-term housing, and assistance that is offered for less than 6 months. These activities are deemed out of the program scope and will not be supported by this program's funding. More information and details about out-of-scope activities can be found on page 9 of the solicitation. Limited use of funds. The following activities can be supported only in limited circumstances. Legal services. Recipients may provide legal assistance as part of providing services to victims. Use of grant funds for legal assistance to victims must be related to matters involving the survivor's victimization or matters in which the survivor's access to housing is impacted. Applicants requesting funds for legal assistance should describe this option in the "What will be done" section. See proposal narrative for more information. Legal assistance costs must not exceed 10% of the total project cost. Purchase and/or lease of vehicles. Use of grant funds for the purchase and/or lease of a vehicle by the grant recipient or project partner will be considered on a case-by-case basis. If an applicant is requesting funds for a vehicle, a lease purchase analysis must be submitted with the application and the cost included in the budget and budget narrative. Grant funds may not be used for the purchase of and/or down payment on a vehicle for private ownership by a victim in a transitional housing program. Services for children. Grant funds may be used to provide direct services to minors who meet the statutory eligibility criteria for transitional housing services, or to provide direct services to children where such services are an ancillary part of providing transitional housing and support services to the child's parent or legal guardian who is a victim of violent crimes. Now, Sharon will review the federal award information with you.
Federal award information. The grant award period is for 36 months and begins on October 1, 2023. Awards will be made for up to $550,000. New and continuation grantees are eligible to apply with the following exceptions. Recipients of an FY 2021 or FY 2022 award under this program are not eligible to apply as the lead applicant or as a partner or subrecipient of an FY 2023 proposal. Likewise, an organization that is a partner or subrecipient of an FY 2021 or FY 2022 award is not eligible to apply as the lead applicant or as a partner or subrecipient on an FY 2023 proposal. Current grantees with a substantial amount of unobligated funds remaining, 50% or more of the previous award as of March 31st, 2023, without adequate justification may not be considered for funding or may receive a reduced award amount if selected for funding in FY 2023. Award period and amounts. All awards are subject to the availability of appropriated funds. There is no guarantee that funds will be available in the future. Funding levels for the FY 2023 are listed below. Proposed budgets are for the entire 36-month project period. Proposals to use grant funds for housing alone or for both housing and support services may submit budgets for up to $500,000. Proposals to use grant funds for support services only may submit budgets for up to $400,000. Proposals addressing the priority area of advancing racial equity as an essential component of ending VAWA crimes may submit budgets for up to $550,000. Proposals addressing the priority area to expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of VAWA crimes, including as a tool for violence prevention, may submit budgets for up to $550,000. OVW expects to prioritize up to 4 projects under this priority area. Proposals addressing the priority area of primarily serving underserved populations may submit budgets for up to $550,000. OVW expects to prioritize up to 4 projects under this priority. Mandatory program requirements. You must, as a grantee, you must participate in OVW-sponsored training and technical assistance. Recipients may be expected to dedicate some OVW funded time and resources to participating in an assessment or evaluation. Post-award submission of policies, procedures, and rules governing the organization's transitional housing program and related support services. Offer transitional housing and support services for at least 6 months, but no more than 24 months with OVW grant funds. Offer support services only to individuals receiving transitional housing other than follow-up services described below. Mandatory program requirements also include offering follow-up support services for transitional housing clients who secure permanent housing. Follow-up services are limited to advocacy, support groups, case management, and minimal financial assistance, such as security deposit or first month's rent for permanent housing, provided for at least 3 months, but not more than a year. Significantly involve a victim service provider in the implementation of the project, including development and review of all policies and procedures, and the provision of support services. Ensure that any staff, partner staff, or service providers working with transitional housing clients are trained to work with victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. Send the project coordinator and 1 other key staff member to an in-person OVW grantee orientation. Mandatory program requirements also mandate that you send key staff to an in-person OVW-sponsored training on voluntary services. Agree to provide transitional housing to their clients without requiring participation in support services. Notify OVW of any changes to the source of funding used to provide OVW grant-funded transitional housing and/or support services. Compensate at least one, if not all, of their project partners for time and travel to participate in project development, training, and implementation. If a partner is a state or unit of local government and the partnership duties are conducted within the course of the agency's regular scope of work, the applicant does not need to compensate the partner if the partner offers this arrangement and an explanation of this arrangement is included in the application. I'll now hand off the discussion to Christina on some of the requirements that are needed for our Grants Financial Management Division, also known as GFMD.
Grants Financial Management Division, GFMD. In the next couple of slides, we're going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents that our financial team, the Grants Financial Management Division, GFMD, reviews. More specifically, we'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior year's applications that could help with expediting our review process. So for today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you with a link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. First, we will highlight the items identified in the data requested with application, which is completed by all applicants in a survey in Just Grants. A list of questions included in the survey appears at the end of the solicitation under the heading Survey Questions. Applicants should just click on the survey name, Pre-Award Risk Assessment, to access and complete the survey in Just Grants. Specifically, two items that we would like to discuss are the single audit response and the IRS three-step safe harbor procedure. OVS requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they indicate that and also specify the end date of their last fiscal year. However, GFMD is finding that applicants do not always include all of this information. Please ensure that this question is answered in its entirety on the data requested with application survey. Question number 3. Another item that we would like to highlight from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS three-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you are required to provide a disclosure letter. The solicitation provides further details and a link to a sample letter. Note that there are 4 required parts of this disclosure letter. The sample letter provided outlines all 4 parts of the disclosure, so please be sure to follow the sample and provide each response to the 4 pieces. The next item that we'd like to discuss is the pre-award risk assessment survey, which assists GFMD during their pre-award risk assessment review for all applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions, and each question has multiple parts. We've noticed from prior years that applicants do not always fully answer all parts of the questions, which in turn requires GFMD to reach out to the applicant and which may delay funding decisions. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been, for example, question 2, where the applicant indicates that they do indeed have internal policies, but don't provide a brief list of topics covered in policies and procedures. On question number 3, some applicants failed to provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not the tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. These are just a few examples, but in general, make sure you read each piece of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. Resources. The next slide will quickly highlight some resources that are available as you're creating the budget to be submitted on your application. Over the last couple of years, GFMD has developed a detailed webinar presentation on how to develop a budget submitted with OVW applications. This presentation addresses some of the challenges that you may face with your budgets and provide some insight on OVW's budget review process. This webinar can be found at the link on this slide. Next up is a uniform guidance, which can be found at 2 CFR 200. Use your favorite search engine for this one. Other resources that include DOJ Financial Guide and the solicitation itself. OVW GFMD Help Desk. We know that this can be a lot of information to process. So if you have any questions about the GFMD information discussed, please feel free to contact GFMD Help Desk at 888-514-8556 or by email at ovw.gfmd@usdoj.gov. I'm going to hand this off to Mirta to discuss with you some of the other program eligibility requirements.
Other program eligibility requirements. We'll discuss required partnerships, role of the victim service provider, transitional housing and support services, length of stay, support services for transitional housing participants only, follow-up services, and voluntary services. Qualified applications. To be qualified for funding under this program, applications must meet the following statutory definition of qualified application. An application is deemed qualified if it has been submitted by an eligible applicant, does not propose any activities that may compromise victim safety, including background checks of victims or clinical evaluations to determine eligibility for services, reflects an understanding of the dynamics of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and/or stalking, and does not propose prohibited activities, including mandatory services for victims. Required partnerships. If an applicant is a victim service provider, application must include at least one other organization, a housing provider, a local homelessness coalition, or other social service provider serving low-income households, including community colleges, workforce centers, community action agencies, and public assistance departments, as a required partner identified in the MOU. If an applicant is a tribe, state, or unit of local government, the application must include both a victim service provider, we'll see that below, and a housing provider as required partners, and may include other types of partners listed above to be identified in the MOU. If an applicant is an organization, including Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Coalition, other nonprofit, non-governmental organization, or community-based and culturally specific organization that has a documented history of effective work concerning VAWA crimes. The application must include at least one other organization, a housing provider, local homelessness coalition, or other social service providers serving low-income households, including community colleges, colleges, workforce centers, community action agencies, and public assistance departments as a required partner identified in the MOU. Victim service provider. Is a nonprofit, non-governmental, or tribal organization or right crisis center, including a state or tribal domestic violence and/or sexual assault coalition that assists or advocates for domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking victims, including a domestic violence shelter, faith-based organization, or other organization with a documented history of effective work concerning domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Victim service providers must provide direct services to victims of violent crime as one of their primary purposes and have a demonstrated history of effective work in this field. The victim service provider partner must play an active role in the development and implementation of the project. Applications from a tribe, state, or unit of local government must demonstrate that the victim service provider is significantly involved in the project design and development and review all the policies and procedures and describe how the applicant will ensure that anyone working with transitional housing survivors is trained in working with the victims of violent crimes. Voluntary services. All services, support, and follow-up provided to recipients of transitional housing, either while in transitional housing or when establishing permanent housing, must be voluntary. Length of stay. Transitional housing with voluntary support services must be offered for at least 6 months and no more than 24 months. Victims may request a waiver for up to an additional 6 months if the victim has made a good faith effort to acquire permanent housing, but has not been able to do so. Please note, this is not shelter, extended shelter, rapid rehousing, financial assistance for just a few months, or permanent subsidized housing. It is transitional housing defined by OVW as housing that is offered for at least 6 months and no more than 24 months to survivors as a bridge between emergency phase and permanent housing. I will now pass it over to Charlena to review the application contents.
Thank you. Application contents. The application must include the summary data sheet, abstract, proposal narrative, budget detail worksheet and narrative, memorandum of understanding, MOU, and the letter of experience, the LOE. The summary data sheet. The summary data sheet questionnaire is a required element and must be fully completed and submitted to successfully apply for this program. Applicants must respond to each question. Abstract. The abstract will be entered into Just Grants, JGS. It must provide a short summary, no more than 2 pages double-spaced, of the proposed project, including names of the applicant and partners, project title, purpose of the project, including goal and intended outcome, primary activities for which funds are requested, who will benefit, including geographic area to be served, products and deliverables, and how the applicant will measure progress in completing project goals and objectives. The project narrative. The project narrative includes the following sections and optional priority areas. Project narrative may not exceed 25 pages, 26 through 29 pages for applications addressing 1 or more priority areas. The project abstract and summary data sheet are not a part of the 25-page limit for the project narrative. The purpose of the application, worth 20 points, address the problem to be addressed and how funding would alleviate it, the target population and how the target population would benefit. What will be done, 30 points. address the project goals and objectives and timeline, describing the specific tasks and activities necessary for accomplishing each. Who will implement the project? 10 points. Organizations and people responsible for implementing the project. Again, the priority areas are: 1, advance racial equity as an essential component of ending sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. 2, expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, including as a tool for violence prevention. And 3, projects primarily serving underserved populations. Budget detail worksheet and narrative. All applications must include a detailed budget and budget narrative. See the sample budget detail worksheet and creating a budget webinar available on the OVW website. Keep in mind that budgetary requirements vary amongst programs. Applicants must submit reasonable budgets based on the resources needed to implement their projects in their specific geographic location. Budget detail worksheet and narrative continued. The budget and budget narrative will be reviewed separately from the proposed project narrative. The budget narrative must describe each line item requested in the budget and explain all costs included in the budget, including how the cost of goods and services are determined and how they will fulfill the objectives of the project. The budget must display a clear link between the specific project activities and the proposed budget items, and not contain items that are not supported by the project narrative. 2, include funds to attend OVW-sponsored TTA in the amount of $15,000 for applicants located in the 48 contiguous states and $20,000 for applicants located in the territories, Hawaii and Alaska. This amount is for the entire 36-month project period and not per year. Applicants may also budget expenses in excess of the required amount if they are aware of relevant non-OVW sponsored conferences or trainings for which they would like permission to use grant funds to support staff and project partner attendance. 3, include a statement describing whether the housing units are applicant owned. 4, include as program income any fees charged to transitional housing participants if the transitional housing is applicant owned. 5, include funds or describe other resources available to the applicant to support activities to ensure access for individuals with disabilities, deaf, hard of hearing individuals, and persons with limited English proficiency. See accessibility under federal award information for more information. 6, include sufficient funds to fully provide language access or describe other resources available to the applicant to ensure meaningful access for persons who are limited in their English proficiency because of their national origin. See accessibility under the federal award administration information section of the solicitation for more information. 7, include sufficient funds to fully provide access for individuals with disabilities or who are hard of hearing, or describe other resources available to the applicant to ensure meaningful access for such individuals. 8, compensate at least one, if not all, project partners as reflected in the MOU. For more information on compensating project partners, please see the sample detail, budget detail worksheet. 9, compensate survivors and individuals with applicable lived experiences related to the project, such as involvement in the justice system, homelessness, or substance use, who participate as consultants in an advisory capacity in focus groups or in other work activities. 10, ensure that any legal assistance costs do not exceed 10% of the total project costs. 11, distinguish clearly between subawards and contracts and allocating any grant funds to other entities. The Memorandum of Understanding, MOU. All applications must include a new MOU that is responsive to the solicitation. The purpose of the MOU is to allow applicants to demonstrate that their proposed projects will be developed by a team of collaborative partners. Remember, required partnership and role of victim service provider in the program eligibility requirements. The MOU should be very specific and mirror the project as described in the project narrative and budget. The MOU should be a single document currently signed and dated by the authorized representative of each partner agency. The letter of experience, worth 10 points. All applicants must submit a signed and currently dated LOE describing the applicant organization's documented history of effective work concerning violent crimes, or such experience and capacity of a partner if the applicant is a tribe, state, or unit of local government. The LOE must address the following. Describe how serving survivors of violent crimes is one of the primary purposes of your organization. Describe the applicant organization's history of providing assistance to survivors of violent crimes. State the number of years, must be at least 3 or more years, the organization has provided direct services to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Describe the direct services provided to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Describe the qualifications or skills of staff assigned to the grant and the training that they have received. Describe how our services are structured and implemented to specifically address the issues facing victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Applications from a tribe or unit of local government must include a letter of experience from their victim service provider partner. In addition to the above information, the letter must make clear how the victim service provider will be involved in the implementation of the proposed project. Sharon would now go over the application and submission information.
So application and submission information. Let's begin with the limit on the number of applications. OVW will consider only one application per organization for the same service area. In addition, if an applicant submits multiple versions of the same application, OVW will only review the most recent system validated version submitted before the deadline. Formatting and technical requirements. Applications must follow the formatting and technical requirements outlined on page 12. Your document should be double-spaced on 8.5 by 11-inch paper, 1-inch margins, type no smaller than 12 point Times New Roman, or Arial font except for footnotes, which may be in 10-point font. Include page numbers and headings and subheadings that correspond to the sections identified in this section of the solicitation. Word documents in the following formats: Microsoft Word, PDF files, or text documents. No more than 25 pages for the proposal narrative. Submission and deadline information. After applicants register with the System for Award Management, SAM, they can begin the grants.gov registration process. The applying organization must complete the grants.gov registration process prior to beginning an application for a federal grant. The e-business point of contact, eBiz POC, must register the applicant organization with grants.gov. In Just Grants, each applying entity will have an assigned entity administrator who is responsible for managing entity-level information and assigning roles in the system. The entity administrator is also the eBiz POC designated in sam.gov. See the Just Grants website for more information on registering with Just Grants. It is the applicant's responsibility to ensure that the application is complete and submitted by the deadline. Failure to meet the submission deadline will result in an application not being considered for funding. Applicants should refer to the list on page 21 of the solicitation to ensure that all required steps and deadlines are met. Failure to begin registration or application submission by the deadlines is not an acceptable reason for late submission. More information on submission and deadlines. Obtain a DUNS number. Register with SAM. Once the SAM registration is active, the applicant will be able to complete the grants.gov registration. Register with grants.gov. Submit your letter of intent by March 14th, 2023 to ovw.transitionalhousing@usdoj.gov email. Download updated version of Adobe Acrobat at least 48 hours before the grants.gov deadline. Applicants are responsible for ensuring that the most up-to-date version of Adobe Acrobat is installed on all computers that may be used to download the solicitation and to submit the SF424 and SFLLL on grants.gov. Go to the Adobe software compatibility page to verify that the Adobe software version is compatible with grants.gov. More information on submission and deadlines. Submit the SF424 and SFLLL in grants.gov as early as possible, but no later than 24 to 48 hours prior to the grants.gov deadline. Register the entity administrator and the application submitter with Just Grants as early as possible, but no later than 48 to 72 hours before the Just Grants deadline. Submit the complete application package at least 24 to 48 hours prior to the Just Grants deadline. Confirm application receipt. Submitting the application components at least 48 hours before each deadline, grants.gov or Just Grants as applicable, will enable the applicant to receive notice of a failed submission and provide an opportunity to correct the error before the applicable deadline. Christina will now tell you about the basic minimum requirement review and some other helpful information.
Basic minimum requirements. All applicants undergo basic minimum requirement, BMR review to determine if the application will move forward to peer review. Applications missing any of the following elements will be removed from further consideration and not forwarded to peer review. Project narrative, budget narrative and detail worksheets, complete MOU, single document, can include multiple signature pages as long as each page includes the name and title of all signatories to the MOU, currently signed and dated. Required participants, letter of experience, LOE, single document signed and currently dated. Application checklist. Please review the application checklist on page 43 of the solicitation prior to the submission. The information provided will help you navigate the submission process. Other info and helpful tips. Read the solicitation in its entirety before applying. Follow the solicitation. The information in the application should be detailed as possible. Continuation applicants should write the application as if it was the first time write the application as if this is the first time that OVW has ever heard their project. Ensure that each section is completely addressed, even if it feels redundant. Number all pages. Fully name and limit use of acronyms included in the application. Information submitted beyond what is required in the solicitation is not likely to be read by OVW staff or peer reviewers. The OVW website contains information on transitional housing models and rent structures. Please utilize the FY23 Solicitation Companion Guide. Visit justicegrants.usdoj.gov for helpful guidance on application submission. Questions. If you have any questions, please email us at ovw.transitionalhousing@usdoj.gov. We will now open up for the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A.
Thank you, Christina. It looks like we have quite a few questions in the chat, so we can start there.
Yes, I'll start from the beginning.
Okay,
Give me 1 second. I was trying to find my glasses. I'm sorry.
understood.
Okay. The first question is, does the proposed program have to include provision of rental assistance to avoid being considered a supportive services only project? Or will it suffice if the program includes support services and coverage of other housing related costs, such as administrative fees, high-risk fees associated with procuring housing for DV survivors? So does the program have to include provision of rental assistance to avoid being considered a supportive services only project?
I'll take this one, Charlena. So to be clear, you have to have transitional housing and supportive services. If we're not paying for, let's say, transitional housing, you have to demonstrate that transitional housing is being paid for in full for the 36-month period. It's not if or you are. If you're showing that you are paying for transitional housing, then that will be in your budget, not administrative fees, not high-risk fees, but that you're paying for transitional housing for your clients, for each of your clients. They have to receive both simultaneously, not support service first or transitional housing later. To be a client, they have to receive both at the same time. And if you're going to just use our funding for transitional housing, you have to demonstrate that you have money and you are able to provide supportive services during that same period of 3-year period for your project. If you're going to use our funding to just do supportive housing, you have to demonstrate that you have funding and resources to pay for housing for your clients in that same 3-month period. And again, back to what our limits are, $400,000 for a 3-month period for support services, $500,000 for a project doing support services or just housing.
Can I chime in here just momentarily? That was my question, and I would just like to clarify.
Sure.
So our agency does provide both rental assistance and supportive services, but the rental assistance is provided via another funding mechanism through HUD. And so what we've historically done is provide through the OVW project, the case management and the career coaching component, and then paid for high risk and administrative fees necessary to procure the housing that then the HUD money pays for. And I'm trying to clarify if the changes to the program here mean that that would no longer be allowed.
It's
not
not
sure
a
what-
change to the program.
There's not a,
It's
yeah.
not a change. I think you can find the answer that you're looking for on page 11 of the solicitation. And I'm gonna just, if it's okay, Mirta, I'll read that, or I'll just paste it here. It's okay. Here we go.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
but you will still have to demonstrate that you have housing sufficient for the 36-month program for the for your project. And
That's
then
not
it
a
would be
problem.
Okay, then that's what you would do, then then you would do supportive services, otherwise at $400,000 rate. That's the only change, is that there's more allowed for supportive services in a 36-month period. However, there's no other change with our structure.
Okay, I'm not sure that fully answers the question, but I may follow up with somebody else.
well,
later.
you just have to, okay, so someone else is, you're providing both housing and support services, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so you're going to demonstrate in your application, one, that you'll use OVW funds for support services, and you'll use HUD funds for the housing aspect, right?
And yes, and that would make us eligible for what maximum amount on the OVW grant? That's what I'm trying to ascertain.
No, that would make you would be eligible to apply for $400,000 because you're using our dollars only to support support services.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. The next question says, can the proposed program also provide support to survivors living in permanent supportive housing or only transitional housing?
So you can only, permanent housing, we cannot support permanent housing. Permanent housing is where we're going to. So the program ends at permanent housing. We can support only transitional housing. We can't support shelter stays, hotel stays. Yes, it's going from transitional housing into permanent housing. Once you get to permanent housing, we no longer can support that program.
Okay. Next question says, if you focus on more than one priority area, can you request $50,000 per priority area or only $550,000 total, no matter number of priority areas? So it will be 550 regardless of how many priority areas that you address. The next question, will we be able to have a copy of this PowerPoint after the webinar? Yes, the presentation today was recorded and will be posted on the OVW website. It should be available in about 2 weeks. The next question says, does legal services include covering civil services such as custody and divorce, and including immigration issues?
Yes.
Yes.
Please note there is a limit to how much of your housing funds can go to legal assistance, which is 10% of your total program.
And I'd also want to say, in terms of legal services, you don't want to start to support a legal action that would extend beyond the grant period, right? So you want to be mindful of that as well. So there's a limit to how much you can budget for legal services, but you also want to be mindful that, for example, you're not supporting some long-term legal action that extends beyond the project period, because then you wouldn't have the grant supported, you wouldn't have the funds, the grant funds to support the action.
Okay, thank you. When stating FY, are you referring to the federal fiscal year? So fiscal year 21 would have started October 1st, 2021.
Correct.
Yes. Just to clarify, there can be no required services through this program, not even just a monthly meeting for case management.
Correct.
That is correct. Okay. The RFP mentions that OVW anticipates granting 80 awards. Of those 80 awards are the only priority areas expanding economic justice and primarily serving underserved populations.
No, there are 3 priority areas.
Yes, there are 3. And the last one is the advanced racial equity. And you can find more information about that in the solicitation. The next question.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Sorry. Oh, can I just, for clarification, I
Sure.
noticed that the funding level 4, there are 4 priority projects for that. And for funding level 5, there are 4 priority projects. So is that correct that there are only 8 total priority projects of the 80 awards being given
No,
out?
no.
Okay.
The next question says, does lead mean solo? I'm guessing they're referring to the lead applicant. If you received a grant in 2021 and 2022, you can't apply in 2023.
Correct.
That's correct.
Right, yeah.
Okay, if we apply for priority area 2, expand economic justice, but are not one of the 4 selected under this priority area, can we still be considered for a grant award of $400,000 to provide support services? Yes.
Yes.
Even if you are not selected for a priority area, you can still be considered for funding, whether that's for transitional housing and support services, or just support services, or just transitional housing only. Could you please repeat how many awards under priority area number 1 that OVW expects to award? We expect to prioritize up to 4 projects. My organization receives OVC funding to support survivors of human trafficking, including sex trafficking, but our OVC funding does not cover transitional housing for our clients. Are we able to utilize these OVW funds to assist clients supported through OVC, but who do not receive housing support under OVC?
Your proposal needs to be sure to being established that you're meeting our criteria, sexual assault, and you also will then have the housing if we're not paying for support services, and be able to demonstrate that your OVC funding runs concurrently with the funding for OVW if you're successful.
Thank you. How many months of rental assistance can we provide with OVW funding? You are able to serve a survivor with transitional housing and support services for up to 24 months, but no less than 6 months. For agency-owned housing, can funding be used to support mortgage payments on the property? No. Funds cannot be used to pay mortgage payments for the property if you own the housing. Next question says, so we can't offer case management for more than a year or can't offer housing assistance for more than a year? That is incorrect. You can offer transitional housing and support services for up to 24 months. Next question says, where is the OVW in-person training held? We are located in Hawaii, so travel expenses for trainings can be significant. So actually, since the pandemic has started, we have not been doing the in-person training for the NGO. Yeah, that's just been done via webinar. So I guess you don't have to worry about that. Do you have anything else?
Yes, I would just say, because there's a chance that in-training will be held, there is a provision under the budget that states that territories, Hawaii and Alaska, those states, must budget $20,000 because we do recognize that your travel expenses may be more than that of those in the 48 lower states. So know that we did consider that, and you should set aside $20,000, and you'll find that in the budget section as to how to set that aside for in-person training. That's what it should equal, and we don't have any locations selected now, as Charlene mentioned, because our travel isn't determined yet because of pandemic. But if it does become the case, you should have $20,000 set aside, $15,000 for 48 other states.
And look, this particular question comes from an MOU partner, I believe, for one of my Hawaii programs. So that program should have funding. You may want to check and see. They should have some funding available for you to attend training, I think. If you're still a part of that, if you're still that MOU partner with that grantee. So you may want to have that discussion with them.
Okay. Next question. If a partner organization's partnership duties fall under their regular scope of work, do they still need to be compensated by the applicant?
If it's under the regular scope of work, then you have to make sure you demonstrate that or speak to that in your MOU in terms of their compensation, and that this, as you demonstrate in the proposal, what they're going to do. They don't necessarily need to be compensated if they agree to that, and it depends how much of that is their regular scope of work. Like a police officer, helping with TROs or something of that nature, shouldn't be compensated for doing what is their regular scope of work. However, if they have to travel to a training with you to do something, then they might need to be compensated unless their organization or the police department determines that they will need to pay for that to happen. So that way you must make sure that you clearly state what they've agreed to. But for the most part, you will be compensating your partners.
Okay. Thank you. What is the average number of participants a program can support either per year or award?
That depends on you.
Yeah, that depends on you. And I want to just say here, oftentimes applicants think that if they propose to serve like this grand number of survivors, somehow that will bolster their application, when in fact, we question that oftentimes because it makes us wonder, can you effectively serve this number of survivors within a 36-month program? So you want to look more to quality of your program than quantity, in terms of saying over 36 months, we're going to serve 60 people. Is that really real when you look at, a survivor being able to remain in your program 6 to 24 months, it may be more feasible for you to think about serving, 10, 12, maybe 15. So just remember quality over quantity whenever you are looking at the proposed number of survivors that you can realistically serve well within that project period.
Okay, thank you. In the priority area, primarily serve underserved population, would this require that majority of clients served be clients from that specific population? Or would it be okay if the agency serves these populations, but they are not the majority of those served?
I'd like to say that depends on you. Again, that's your presentation as to there are questions under the priority areas of primarily serving that population. You determine what that population is. You make the argument or the presentation of how you're going to serve that population and why they're under the served population. So again, that depends on your presentation of that information.
Thank you. If transitional housing is offered, but some participants leave before the 6-month period, would that make those cases ineligible for funding? No, I would say no. Is that right, Mieta?
I would say no, but with a caveat like you is that your program is set up to provide for clients that need a 6-month to 24-month period in assistance. That you should be aware of that, not for someone who needs 3 months or 2 months or just needs their how do you say, their initial security deposit and first month's rent paid. Things like that happen, and we see that. That's a rare case that you have those that finish or that don't need assistance through the 6-month period. Then you're going to need to look at how you determine your eligibility, but it doesn't make you ineligible for funding or if they leave before then.
Okay. Thank you. Next question says, does OVW or DOJ have a sample of a lease purchase analysis for a vehicle included in submission?
I'm going to direct you to the resources for applicants under our website and ask you to use the sample budget. There is a section there about looking at leases and looking at cars. I'm not sure it's to the degree that you want a lease purchase analysis, but you can also double check with the, I would say, a solicitation companion guide and the OVW office on that. But first go to the resources for applicants on our website under sample budget, and that should give you some guidance.
Okay. Next, we provide transitional housing with employment readiness focus and would like to include outreach participants for whom we are not providing transitional housing, nor are we providing time-limited subsidies or rental assistance. These survivors are participating in DV support groups and other services at our outreach office, and we would like to offer them the employment education supports we are offering to our transitional housing participants. Can these funds be used to pay for services to those survivors under the priority area number 2 of economic justice and financial advocacy as a tool for prevention? I guess I don't know if you're asking, I don't know, I guess I'm unclear if the survivors that you're asking about are not in transitional housing.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess, and maybe you want to unmute yourself, but I'm gonna guess that you have a transitional housing program of your own. You have an outreach where you provide support services, so you would be using our funds to provide just transitional housing for your participants. If I'm reading that correctly, I would say that you would provide a proposal for transitional housing for $500,000, and that you would offer documentation that shows that you can offer your outreach clients, support services for the 36-month period during that time, and that our funding will just be for transitional housing, from what I gather, and not under your program you currently have, but a separate program for outreach services, and you would have to make that argument.
This was my
I understand.
question. Oh, sorry. Hi.
Good, go ahead.
Sorry. So I think it's just the wording is confusing under economic justice and financial advocacy as a tool for prevention. If they're not, if they're not currently in need of going into a transitional housing, but still need employment readiness and education in order to be financially secure
No,
and not
they-
dependent on an abuser. But I think you answered this.
Okay, and I would say, given that determination, then I don't think this program would necessarily be for you, because
Right.
we have to offer transitional housing and support services simultaneously to be considered a client, and for you to provide them funding. And if they don't need transitional housing, then they wouldn't be somebody who's eligible for our program. Therefore, this would be a lot of work for you for not being able to use it for your clients.
Not for these specific clients, but yes, thank you.
Yes, you got it.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
You got it.
Thank you. The next question says, the RFP sometimes uses domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and sometimes uses domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Must an organization serve all types of victimizations? Or if it is a DV-specific agency, could it just serve DV survivors?
Yes. You can determine what is your, how do you say, it?
Your
Your
area of
specialty.
focus. Yeah.
Yes. And determine. And I will just say in defense of the RFP, it is used properly. Sometimes we say or stalking. It depends which one you want to use. And it says and stalking, where we're usually talking about the violent crimes that we address, which is when we say we address all these and stalking. So that is, but your choice is the one that you can focus and demonstrate in your proposal that you can most clearly and with quality address for survivors.
Thank you. Is there a limit to the number of victims who can receive transitional housing assistance and/or utility assistance with grant funds?
Sharon, you did a good job with this.
Okay, is there a limit to the number of victims who can receive transitional housing assistance and or utility assistance? No, there's no limit to the number, but as an organization providing those services, you determine in this instance, under this program, how many survivors you can serve well over this 36-month project period. So it's no limit, but just keep in mind what I said earlier, quality over quantity.
Thank you. Next question says legal services provided must be provided per page 9 and page 15 of the solicitation. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but you don't have to provide legal services. That is contingent upon your program.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
No problem. Next question is a rapid rehousing program that provides rental assistance and other housing related financial assistance for 6 to 24 months, eligible for funding under Purpose Area 2, short-term housing assistance.
Yes. But again, I will reiterate, 6 to 24 months. That's what your clients have, and simultaneously transitional housing and support services, not either or, not 1 or month, 2 month determination of difference. Those things have to be offered simultaneously at that time for each client and for 6 to 24 months.
Okay. We are a transitional housing provider serving domestic violence survivors. Are we required to have an outside partner?
Yes.
Is there any penalty for not spending all of the money awarded?
There's no penalty for that, but just make sure that your budget reflects your need based in consideration of what the budget caps are.
Okay. And their second question was, are there restrictions or is there a max amount we can use toward one client? For example, some grants in the past have only allowed us to cover 3 months of rent versus rent only in a certain year. No, there isn't. I don't think there are any restrictions or max amount that you can use towards one client. Is there a minimum amount that we can request? I'm assuming request for funding. There isn't really a minimum amount, but I would apply for the maximum amount if you can. So I would just say that.
Justifiably. Don't apply for money. I say this. Yeah, don't apply for, $500,000 if you don't have the need, one, for a $500,000 award or the capacity to manage it.
Yes.
Okay. RFP states they do, however, need to be individuals for whom emergency shelter services or other crisis intervention services are unavailable or insufficient. What does insufficient mean? Will we need to prove insufficient? Will we need to prove unavailable?
No, none of that's stated in the proposal. I mean, in the solicitation. We are not asking you to prove insufficient or unavailable. We ask you to provide where the need is. And in our criteria, insufficient or unavailable means that if a client, let's say in a rural community and there's just one bed left for emergency shelter, then can you work to offer them transitional housing? If that's what you have or can provide, then you can, if you can do that. If there's no more space, if there's only one bed, things like that nature that you provide, you justify, and that you can offer if they're homeless and they are seeking and you have unavailable emergency shelter for them, then that's where you make that determination. However, I don't believe our solicitation asks you to prove any of that.
Could it also be used for clients exiting shelter, or would that be unincluded since the client would have been at shelter immediately prior to the housing?
No, we have, how do I say this? You're not required to be in shelter to be offered transitional housing. So if they exit shelter or they find it, if that's the case, then that might be the means by which they find transitional housing, but they can come from anywhere, and you just have to make sure they're eligible to receive transitional housing and support services simultaneously. They're a willing participant in the program.
Okay.
Do you need additional clarification? Is that good?
That's clear. Thank you.
You got it.
All right, next question. Can funds provide salaries for employees who do not provide direct services to victims, but who track victim statistics connected to the grant?
Yes.
Okay. Can the LOE be submitted instead of a MOU? No, both the MOU and the LOE need to be submitted. The MOU is the memorandum of understanding that discusses your required partnerships, and the LOE is your letter of experience that is for your organization or your partners.
And either one of them missing the required documents, you will be eliminated from further consideration.
Yeah, and this is a good point to emphasize the importance of making sure that you submit all of the documents on the checklist, and particularly when it comes to the MOU and the LOE, that those documents are currently dated and currently signed. And I say this in terms of the MOUs, specifically to continuation applicants, because sometimes what we've seen is that you'll submit the same MOU you did 3 years ago, and it's not currently dated, not currently signed, and that will eliminate you from consideration. So make sure that those documents are up to date.
I'd also like to say for new grantees that we've noted as well, that they submit MOUs that belong to other grants or contracts or other solicitations that they're applying for, and that they might be using the same partners, but the duties or the requirements don't fit the solicitation clearly, and it shows that this is not meant for this particular proposal, and that also eliminates you.
Okay. Thank you. Next question says, if the program's focus is providing transitional housing to DV survivors, as well as optional case management, trauma-informed counseling, et cetera, is an outside partner still required? So if the program's focus is providing transitional housing to DV survivors, is an outside partner still required? Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If the program's focus, I think, okay, that's the same question, I'm sorry. The RFP says the budget and budget narrative are worth 15 points, not 10 points. That is correct. The budget and narrative are worth 15 points. Can you more clearly define voluntary services? Can advocates initiate contact with victims and/or recommend that victims meet with them on a regular basis as long as it is not required of them in order to remain in transitional housing?
Yes, you said it.
Yeah, that's fine. You can recommend that they meet on a regular basis, but you cannot require them in any way to do anything in order to remain in transitional housing.
And voluntary services is just that they voluntarily make use of the services that you have presented for them, or that they have, or that you have. None of it can be required, mandated, or forced. So therefore, voluntary services is what you offer them. It has nothing to do with whether they get housing or not, or whether they have to attend services or not.
And you want to also make sure, since we're talking about voluntary services, that the services you are providing are relevant. You know, are services that survivors will actually take advantage of. And this may be a challenge for new applicants, or, you know, newer programs that aren't quite sure, you know, what services may be best suited for the survivors in your program. That can be a challenge. But I'll just stick with what I said. Make sure that the services are relevant. The services that, you know, one group of participants utilize may not be the same services that another group of survivors may need. So you want to just keep what do I want to say? You want to be informed. You want to be well informed about the services that survivors need. If they're coming into your program, and, you know, education has been something that you've provided, you've supported, and survivors have utilized those services, you want to maintain those relationships that you have with, you know, local colleges or trade schools or what have you, or, you know, financial institutions, whatever the case is. But just do a good assessment around the services that you are providing. If you recognize you provided a service, you know, last funding cycle that didn't serve, nobody used it. So revisit that and maybe bring some new partners to the table. And in bringing partners to the table, you want to make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck. You want to look at what they're actually bringing. How are they? What are you getting from that partner that everyone else may not have access to? Like, what is it about this relationship that you have with this MOU partner that really serves your program? So just ask yourself those questions as you engage with potential partners, or as you continue to build relationships with the partners that you have. How can you, do some parts of that relationship need to evolve in order to meet the needs of the survivors in your program?
Okay, thank you. The RFP reads, grantees may use up to 2% of grant funds to assess their work for internal improvement purposes only, such as convening a listening session to identify service gaps in the community. May the budget include incentives for those participating in a focus group and/or program advisory board?
I'm going to ask you to go to our solicitation companion guide. It has parameters around what is considered an assessment or needs assessment or a research project. We don't pay for incentives. However, it determines what you or how you propose that with your program. So I will recommend, please revisit our solicitation companion guide, and you'll find links throughout that in the solicitation.
Thank you. This was my question. Just for clarification, I actually had posted this before seeing one of your budget slides that you presented, and I didn't quite catch it. I think one of the budget slides had a number 9 on it that made reference to persons with lived experience, and I wondered, could you share what was said about compensating persons with lived experience?
Yes, for the budget, yes, you were to compensate survivors and individuals with applicable lived experiences related to the project, such as involvement in the justice system, homelessness, or substance use, who participate as consultants in an advisory capacity in focus groups or in other work activities. So that would speak to your question.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
And remember, it's not an incentive, it's a compensation.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what was that, Marta?
I was going to say, it's not incentive, it's a compensation.
Yes, and yes, I appreciate the distinction. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next question kind of goes along with that. Are the paid consultants, survivors, and individuals with lived applicable experiences required? Yes. It must be addressed in the budget in your application. The next question says, what qualifies someone for housing? It's a little unclear in the solicitation packet. Do they need to currently be fleeing domestic violence, or do they have to come from a shelter? Do both situations make clients eligible? Yes, both situations make clients eligible, and it's not specific to fleeing, and it's not specific to coming from a shelter. They just need to be homeless or in need of housing to be eligible for the program, and a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, or stalking. And more information about the eligibility should be included in the solicitation.
It is.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay. Is there a page limit on the LOE, and should it be double spaced? The LOE, I believe, is 2 pages.
Yes.
And it is double spaced. Yes.
Correct.
If we are a victim service provider who operates a transitional housing program, as well as providing victim support services, would we only provide the LOE Or do we also have to provide an MOU with additional partners specific to this funding?
You've already answered it.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah.
There's no way to like retract my question if you've already answered. So thank you.
Like that,
No
Jane.
problem.
Thank you, Jane. I like that.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody is aware of that as well. Thank you for that, Jane. Remember that distinction.
Okay. Is 10% de minimis indirect rate permitted in this application?
Yes.
Yeah. But do they have to, they should have an approved indirect cost rate, is that right?
No, if they don't have one, this would be exactly why they would use it.
Oh, okay, okay.
The LOE, again, should be double spaced. Next, if legal assistance funds are awarded, can a case started for an active transitional housing client continue beyond the housing assistance if the case is not finished? And this is the
No.
case where we say it could, but we just advise you to just, I guess, take note of the cases that you're taking on and if they can be finished within the 36-month award period.
Oh, is it the issue with the award period, or is the issue with whether the client is actively receiving housing?
The award period.
Oh, I misunderstood that. So if say the client was in, this actually answers a follow-up question I posed, but if a client is receiving legal assistance, they're active in the housing program, or if they're a participant in the housing program, their rental assistance ends because they no longer need that, but they've continued in aftercare. We could continue paying on the case just as long as it's within the 36-month award period. Is that correct?
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, so they exit transitional housing, but the case is still pending. Is
Right.
that what you're saying?
Right. There's not a resolution of that.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Just
I
some of the
think
things
that-
like the immigration and such like that, like it's not done quickly. So
I would like to get our
Yeah.
attorney advisor's opinion on that. So can you email that to us?
yes, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I will just say this in the meantime for others that are just at the 3 months period, your grant ends. So when your grant ends, you have no access to additional funds, whether you have funds remaining or not. Once your period ends, and we can't keep it open for like a case or something if you haven't used up all your funds. It's typically around your 3-month period, and I mean your 36-month period, and then the funding would end, and it would depend on you if you're going to continue to fund that case, but it wouldn't be with Transitional Housing Fund. But what you're asking, and I totally appreciate that, it might just be that you have only 24 months to use that funding depending on the needs of the client. But we will certainly discuss that. I think that's with the new legal assistance, that's an issue we haven't discussed before. Thank you for that.
Okay. Next question says, how many additional pages are allowed per priority area? You said 26 to 29 pages for applicants addressing one or more priority areas. Is that 1 page per priority area, or 3 additional pages even if you're doing 1 priority area? That is 1 page per priority area. So if you are not addressing priority areas, you would have a 25-page narrative. If you decide to address 1 priority area, you would have 26 pages. If you decide to address 2 of them, it will be 27, and so on. So yeah, it's just per priority area. The next question says, does just grants require registration separate from grants.gov? And I believe that is a yes. That is, it is 2 separate registrations, correct? Okay. More information about that can be found in solicitation.
Yep, and make sure, I just want to emphasize the importance of meeting those deadlines of registration in each of those systems so that you can submit your application on time. Make sure you give yourself ample time to submit your application so that you're not faced with a last minute submission and something doesn't go through and you don't have time to correct it. Because submitting a late application is not a reason to request a late application submission. It won't be considered. So please, please, please give yourself ample time to get it in and, you know, to address any challenges that you may face once it's submitted.
Okay. Do nonprofits need a DUNS number, or is it the EIN and UEI sufficient? So I believe they did away with the DUNS number, and I think that was replaced with the unique identifier, the UEI.
Yeah.
Okay. Does the letter of intent also need to be submitted as an attachment with the full application submission? No, the letter of intent is submitted prior to your submission. I believe the letter of intent is due by the 14th of March. In addition to providing transitional housing within the applicant's service area for the project, could funds be used to support transitional housing for survivors who need to relocate to another state or county? Yes. In the past, the LOE was allowed as a single space since it's a letter format. Is it still that way? It is a 2-page limit for the LOE and it must be double spaced. Can rental assistance be paid to landlords via ACH deposits? Not sure about that.
Electronic payments, I'm assuming they're asking. That's what
Yeah,
it
but
looks like to
I'm
me.
not sure about that, but not an issue for the solicitation or proposal. That we can
Right.
determine if you're awarded.
Okay. All right, the letter of intent sample on the DOJ website asks for the SAM's DUNS number. Should we include the DUNS number or the unique entity ID? Just include the unique entity ID. It's possible that it may not have been updated yet. Is the letter of intent only to indicate if we are a first-time grant user or a repeat grant user? The LOE is just to let us know that you are planning to apply for the grant. It's just the letter of intent. Is a partner required? Does OVW assign different weights and points to a compensated partner versus a non-compensated partner? A partner is required, but yeah, does OVW assign different weights and points to a compensated partner versus a non-compensated partner?
I will say that you will find that, I will say yes, in that you'll find that under the criteria for MOU, that you're asked who your partners are, what you're receiving your compensation. Also, you'll find that in the budget section, depending on what you're compensating your partner. So there is a weight or points associated with that. Those criteria are broken up depending on what you say their duties are and what you're compensating for. But in our solicitation, it does ask you to compensate partners and to, again, like I said, justification if you're not, to say that, but it is asked in your solicitation and under those criteria. So one, you must have a partner, and then depending how you use your partner and what they do, that criteria will be asked in the MOU and the budget for us to weigh.
Okay.
But is it more to do with them meeting the requirements of the MOU?
Yes.
Okay.
Next question, is a planning period allowed before services begin to be provided? I don't really know how to answer that.
I would, these are for implementation. I would say you'd have to justify, again, you would have to make clear that proposal and that timeline, but Again, these are made for implementation for a 36-month period of time.
Thank you. If you currently have an award that pays for transitional housing and the award ends before 36 months, but is likely to be renewed, how do we demonstrate this if the award letter does not last the full 36 months? If you currently have.
No. That will come under consideration. Know that, because you have to provide transitional housing and support services simultaneously. So it will affect your ability. And again, just like us, there's no guaranteed funding. Unless you're going to guarantee, we ask that you provide documentation that it will suffice for the 36-month period.
Thank you. The short-term housing assistance only supports survivors who are moving into new independent housing. For example, could an agency offer short-term assistance for a client whose abuser has exited the home and they now are trying to sustain their own rent or sustain rent on their own? So I guess the answer would be no. Does short-term housing assistance only support survivors who are moving into new independent housing?
No, it's not to take over housing for a survivor. It says homeless. Not that you will trade in. So the criteria for your survivor is someone who is homeless and in need of housing, not somebody who is in housing.
Should MOU activities persist through the full 36-month period? For example, would MOUs for a one-time train the trainer event or 12 months of technical assistance be acceptable?
So how is that MOU partner serving survivors? That would be my question in this particular scenario, first of all.
Again, I will have to, I'm looking at that. Again, you have to make the case in your proposal that MOU activities could be good for only a one-time training event, and that's supportive of your proposal and that it's strong. Again, that's up to you to make that demonstration, or that it's only for 12 months and that is the partner and you guys can sustain everything else without it and still provide a robust program. Again, that's for you to make that argument to the peer reviewers.
Okay, thank you. Someone said, I am not able to find information on how to create an account with Just Grants within the RFA or on the Just Grants training FAQ websites. Send an email to the housing inbox, but there should be information in the solicitation.
I
on
would
how to
look to call,
register. Yeah.
yes, or contact the Just Grants Help Desk. There's a number, time period for you to call that every day, 8 to 9 p.m. I believe, and 8 to 5 on weekends for you to do that and for them to walk you through, and don't do that sooner rather than later.
Okay, yeah, maybe check on page, I think it should be starting on page 38 for the prior to submission information.
Thank you.
We provide transitional housing and support services. Our survivors stay in transitional housing for up to 2 years, and we currently provide rental assistance while the survivors pay a portion of their rent based on their income level. Should we apply as transitional housing assistance or short-term housing assistance? I guess this is in reference to the purpose area.
I guess you could, a purpose area 1 or 2. You can do purpose area 1 if you already have that in existence. That you can do that. Both of them apply. They won't, either one of them will not affect your, how do you say, proposal standing or points. So determine which one best meets me, but you can go for both 1 and 2 and put those as your purpose areas.
Okay. Next question, could you please clarify how many awards are funded per each priority area? So we don't know exactly how many awards, I guess, would be funded under each priority area because we will know once we receive the applications, but we do prioritize up to 4 per priority area. The next question.
And can I just put a little emphasis here as far as like priority areas, because I think this came up earlier. You can apply for funding to for housing and support services, you know, without having applied for a priority area. That doesn't, like, all of the funding that will be provided, all of the awards that we make aren't solely for those programs who apply to address a priority area. Some of you will, and that's where your funding request is at the level of whatever that priority area is. Some of you will not, and that's where your funding request will land in that instance as well. I just wanted to clear that, you know, just to make that abundantly clear, I suppose.
Okay. Thank you. And I do also want to clarify in reference to a question that was asked earlier about the survivors of the crimes who are served by each program. So while you may want to focus on serving only domestic violence survivors, if a sexual assault survivor or a survivor of dating violence or stalking comes through the doors of your program, you still have to serve that survivor, even if your focus, if you only say that you're serving DV survivors. If a survivor of one of the 4 VAWA crimes comes through your door, you cannot turn them away for service. So I just wanted to clarify that before we move on. Okay, I heard you say that legal assistance may only be provided while survivors are also receiving housing assistance. Since aftercare support is required to be offered, could legal assistance continue during the aftercare period?
This was me again. My name's Tahani, but I was going to. This relates to the earlier question that I spoke up about, so I am working on an email to you now.
And I can say to Hani, yes, you could offer legal assistance beyond during the aftercare period.
Oh,
however, you are limited in using funds during the aftercare period. So it's very limited, usually to first and second month. And we're looking for you to be self-sufficient in the ongoing period of aftercare. So we do minimally 3 months. You can go up to 12 months, but no, that's not with a how do you call funding support, because then you'd still be in transitional housing clients. So be aware of that. And so we're still going to have to go over your question, but I want others to be clear that it's not with a continued funding background. We're considering that aftercare is you can call for maybe a counseling or support group or child care for a day, but it's not to continue self-sufficient, continue full program afterwards. So know that it's for assistance here or there for just a period of time, and then you've graduated. You're out of the program after that point in time. I like to look at it like high school. There comes a graduation date and you might call back to get your transcript or something like that, but you're not going to be attending classes every day.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question, can your program decide how many months to provide housing and services within the 6 to 24 months and budget accordingly? Yes. You are expected to select how long your program will provide transitional housing and support services to survivors, somewhere between the 6 to 24 month period. And you can explicitly state that in your application. If we have to provide supportive services and transitional housing for them to be a client, but if a client declines supportive services and we cannot require it, how can we meet that requirement? As long as you are offering them the transitional housing and support services, they just have the option to accept it or not. So if they don't want to participate in the support services, then that is fine. But you still have both of them have to be available to the survivor at the same time. Next question says, what is permanent housing? If we pay the first 6 months of a new apartment and after 6 months, a client can sustain that apartment on their own, does that then become permanent once they're able to sustain on their own? Yes.
If they are exiting the program at that 6 month mark, because they no longer need the program, yeah, it becomes permanent housing. It sounds like they may be transitioning in place, meaning that this is where they were, this is the unit that you help them find. They are, first of all, enrolled in the transitional housing program, receiving housing and support services. And, 6 months in, they no longer need the benefit of the program and they're able to sustain the unit on their own. Everything's going great in their life. Yes, they can remain in that unit, transitioning in place, if you will, and sustain that unit on their own.
I just want to make that clear. You shouldn't be that they are on their own, and that means permanent because they can sustain the apartment. Remember, you're doing a program, so you're offering them support services for counseling, for safety planning, childcare, transportation, all those elements that come. It's not just the housing, it's the whole program that you're offering and support services that are encompassed. So if they can sustain all that, then you're right, they don't need your program anymore, and they're exiting the program, and it's just like that. They've graduated, they're on their own, and they don't need to come back to you but for a call here and there, and then they're on their own. But make sure that's the case, not just that now I have the funds to pay for the rent, and therefore you're out of the program. Know that you're offering them a whole program. You're not just offering them housing or just support services.
Okay. Next, is there someone at OVW that I can speak to regarding required partnerships? We have serious challenges finding organizations that we can trust and with whom we can have successful partnerships. Yes, please email the OVW Transitional Housing inbox to request to speak to a member of the Transitional Housing Unit. If we do not own the property as lead applicant, but our MOU partner does, can we include program fees as a part of the project budget with ability to waive if survivors do not have the resources to pay? Yes, you can include that in the budget, and you have to report the fees as program income, and those funds will need to be expended before you are able to expend the funds on your award. So yes, please see the budget for more information about that. Our organization pays security deposit, first month's rent in full, and then pays half if the rent for month 3 and 4 and for month 5. we pay 1/3 of rent. Can we do the same thing for 6 to 12 months? I mean, 6 to 24 months, or will we be required to pay full rent throughout the grant period?
Okay, you could do that, but understand the program allows you to pay the full month's rent. What you don't want to do is, what would happen is that you're cherry picking for people who can have some kind of income, and that's not allowed under the program, so that they can be able to pay their rent, for within 2 months of being there, or half their rent, and then 1/3 of their rent, and so forth. I would recommend and look for that you have the ability to pay for 6 to 24 months of full rent through that period, and budget that way. And if they do end up having some income to pay towards that, then that's fine. But make sure that your system isn't set up in a manner that shows that you're cherry picking your victims, meaning that, oh, you have income, you can pay for this in some period of time, 2 months down the line, and then 3 months, and then 4 months, and then we're out of here in 6 months. So know that is not something that's allowed with the grant program. So make sure you look at that, what's allowable, what's not allowable, or that's an activity that compromises victim safety, we'll say. So be careful about that. But in your best interest, I would recommend you setting a budget that pays fully for clients for 6 to 24 months.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you. At this time, we're going to close the Q&A. If you presented a question in the chat that has not yet been answered, I'm going to ask you to please send your question to the OVW Transitional Housing inbox. And the email address is ovw.transitionalhousing@usdoj.gov, and you will receive a response from the housing inbox. I also want to note from the presentation today, the summary data sheet and the data requested with application may have been used. Those terms are the same. It still refers to a questionnaire. It's just a list of questions about your organization, and it is called the summary data sheet, and it is referenced in the solicitation. I think that is about it. Did you have anything else to add, Sharon, in the meantime?
Yeah, I think there's only one more question. I think there's only one more question, Charlene, that says, is it up to 24 months of concurrent funding if the client no longer needs a program at 6 months, but then something happens, job loss, car wreck, etc., then they need to re-enter the program? Can they be joined at that point? If they haven't used up all their 24 months, you can entertain that. They return, but you make sure that's clearly documented, and it's for being a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking. So make sure you have that well in hand. There are criteria for them coming back. Okay. I think that's the last question, to be quite honest. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing your application.